Fired for being a useless freeloader. What? I couldn't understand Joseph's words for a moment and was stunned. I'm firing you, and then who should I fire next? Joseph said with a grin, and I felt my blood run cold. In that case, it's better if only I get fired. Thank you for everything. I greeted, picked up my stuff, and left the factory. A week after quitting, I happened to look at my phone and saw a missed call from the company. Hey, get to the office right now. What's this $3 million loss? I frowned at the angry voice coming from the phone. As I stayed silent, I heard some commotion on the other end. John, I just heard. I was told you were on sick leave. Sorry for the late contact. President Smith's voice sounded more desperate than I'd ever heard. He also sounded panicked. I'll head to the company right away. Before I knew it, I had answered that way. My name is John Anderson, 50 years old. I work at a factory that makes precision equipment parts. The most famous parts we make are screws. You might think all screws are the same, but that's not true at all. The screws we make are incredibly tiny, just 0.6 millimeters in size. This company was founded by Tom Smith when he was 31 years old. President Smith's family was quite wealthy, and his father also ran a company. So, he always had the desire to start his own company and become a president. I am one of the founding members of this company. At that time, I was 18 years old and a senior in a technical high school. I met President Smith while discussing my career options with my guidance counselor. President Smith came to the school every day, convincing me to join his new company. Honestly, I wasn't without worries about joining a company that didn't even exist yet. However, in the end, I was swayed by President Smith's passionate persuasion and joined the company. People around me said, "You're young. If it doesn't work out, you can always join another company." But I had no such intention. Once I decided to do it, I was determined to be of help to President Smith and to grow the company. There were times when we were on the brink of bankruptcy, but now the company has 70 employees. President Smith is 63 years old this year and will retire in 2 years. It's hard to imagine working without him, and thinking about it makes me feel lonely. Every time the topic of his retirement comes up, I know it's childish, but I find myself leaving the room or changing the subject. For me, President Smith was everything in my work. The thought of him leaving was unbearably sad. Recently, there have been a lot of personnel changes, which I understand are in preparation for President Smith's retirement. The rumor is that the next president will be Vice President Chris Jones, one of the founding members. Vice President Jones is 55 years old this year and has shared both hardships and joys with us since the beginning. To me, he is like an older brother. I've always looked up to him, and his competence is beyond question. There is no one more suitable for the next president than Vice President Jones. In the recent personnel changes, a new employee joined the company. His name is Joseph Johnson, a 58-year-old man. Joseph immediately took the position of factory manager upon joining. In other words, he became my boss. According to rumors, Joseph is the younger brother of the president of a company we've been dealing with for a long time. This client is one of our major accounts. No matter how you look at it, Joseph got in through connections, but President Smith probably couldn't refuse. If we lost business with that company, our operations would be severely impacted. External hires through connections are rare at our company. So I initially felt some resistance, but I decided to accept it as something other companies do normally. However, Joseph turned out to be quite a troublesome individual. Every day, I work in the factory, facing the machines and making parts. Most of our parts don't get made automatically. They require a fair amount of manual labor. There are about 30 employees working in the factory, which account for the half of the total employees. The rest of the employees work at the headquarters next to the factory. Since Joseph is the factory manager, he should logically be working in the factory, but he said, I don't want to work in a dirty place like the factory. I'll be at headquarters. Call me if anything comes up. And went to the headquarters. What is he doing at headquarters as the factory manager? This happened on Joseph's first day, so the factory workers completely see him as the enemy. From my perspective, it's actually easier to work without Joseph around, because I'd have to be on edge if he were here. Why do you think Joseph came to our company? The one who asked me this while working was James Brown, one of my subordinates. He's also a factory worker, young at 30, but very dedicated. So I trust him. Who knows, it was the president's decision, so I have no idea. I heard he's sleeping in his car or playing games on his phone to avoid being caught at headquarters by President Smith. One of my colleagues even saw him at a casino. Seriously? James's words made me thoroughly disgusted. Using connections to join our company only to not work at all. What is he thinking? It also infuriates me that he's managing to keep it from President Smith. I'll talk to the president about it. Honestly, I don't want Joseph in the factory either. I feel the same way. I understand what James is getting at. Despite doing no work, Joseph's salary is better than James's. There's nothing more infuriating than this. I'm not the type to get angry at others. So I had overlooked it since it was President Smith's decision. But now that my subordinates are complaining, I can't ignore it. During lunch break that day, I headed to headquarters to talk to President Smith. Unfortunately, he was out, but Joseph was boldly playing games on his phone in the office. I could sense that the other employees were avoiding looking at Joseph. Even though they knew it was wrong, they couldn't risk upsetting the brother of an important client's president. Joseph, can I have a word with you? Of course. I was also wary of angering our client's president, but I couldn't turn a blind eye to this situation. I had intended to speak directly to President Smith, but given the circumstances, I had no choice. When I spoke to Joseph, he looked at me with annoyance. The smell of cigarette smoke was so strong that I instinctively held my breath. What? I believe it's work hours. What are you doing here? I said, glancing at Joseph's phone. He clicked his tongue and shouted, What are you looking at? I was taken aback by his sudden outburst and fell silent in shock. This is the very definition of a defensive outburst. Do you know who I am? If I tell my brother to stop doing business with this company, what do you think will happen? This company will be done in an instant, and it'll be your fault. It was a complete villain line. But Joseph wasn't wrong. However, I couldn't back down now. I had to face my factory workers. At the very least, can't you go to the factory? Aren't you ashamed of playing games all day and getting paid more than anyone in the factory? Ashamed? No way. This is my rightful privilege. My brother runs a big company, and thanks to that, I've always lived a wealthy life. From my perspective, even the factory manager's position is too low. I expected a director or some high-ranking post, but managing a dusty factory, it's a joke. Well, sorry about that. Joseph's laugh froze instantly. President Smith's voice had interrupted. President Smith had returned to the company unnoticed, glaring at Joseph with a stern expression. I knew this look. It meant he was really angry. Even Joseph seemed to realize the gravity of the situation, his eyes darting nervously. No, that's not it. I mean, no excuses. Go to the factory with John right now. You were hired on the condition that you'd work seriously. Don't think you can slack off just because you're Joseph's brother. President Smith's firm words were met with a small yes from Joseph. I felt relieved, thinking that our workplace would finally become normal, but I soon realized my naivety. From the next day, Joseph started showing up at the factory. He arrived on time and even participated in the morning meetings. The factory workers were all bewildered by his sudden change. President Smith despises dishonesty and corruption, so Joseph's behavior must have been utterly unacceptable to him. I was assigned to teach Joseph the factory manager's duties. Why do I have to learn from you? Even though he started coming to work, he still held hostility towards me. I pretended not to hear Joseph's grumbling. I spent the whole day passing on the responsibilities of the job. The duties of the factory manager aren't many. One reason is that the employees are all highly competent. Despite complaining the entire time, Joseph eventually started working silently, perhaps realizing he had no choice. A week after Joseph began working at the factory, something happened. That day, I was making parts as usual, facing the machines. "Hey, who made these parts?" I heard Joseph's yelling from somewhere and looked up, scanning the area. Other employees also frowned and stopped their work. "Is something wrong?" When I asked, Joseph threw the box he was holding at me. It contained screws I had made, and a large number of screws scattered across the floor. "What are you doing?" "These screws were scheduled for delivery to a client today. Those scattered on the floor might be bent and cannot be delivered." "What's the problem? How much time did you waste making these lousy screws?" "These screws are special. We've patented them." Most of our screws are patented, but this one is our flagship product. We spent a lot of time on its development and design. Even if it's patented, it's just a screw, right? "How many days did it take you to make this many? You should be able to make these in an hour." As he said, it took me 3 days to make these screws. However, I certainly wasn't slacking off. These screws are quite special, so they take time to produce. "The boss seems to like you, right? You get the same salary as me, the factory manager, don't you?" I had no response to Joseph's words and remained silent. "I'm not in any position, but I do earn more than the other employees. It's likely because I'm one of the founding members. However, I've never mentioned this to the other employees." I wondered what my subordinates thought after hearing Joseph's words. I can't blame President Smith for telling Joseph about it, but I wished he hadn't said it in front of everyone. "Even so, you're doing such a half-hearted job. Aren't you ashamed, earning a high salary, making these screws slowly? A useless freeloader. You're fired." "What?" I couldn't comprehend Joseph's words for a moment and was stunned. The other employees also blinked in disbelief. What on earth is he talking about? Just because you're a founding member doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. It's annoying. I'm the factory manager now, so I'm going to start firing the troublesome employees. Honestly, we don't need this many employees just to make screws. The machines do most of the work. We only need a few people here." Everything Joseph said was wrong. There's a reason we have this many employees in the factory. However, explaining this to him would be pointless. "I'm firing you first, then I'll decide who else to fire." Joseph's smirk made my blood run cold. Most of the employees here are still young. Many have small children, and getting fired would be disastrous for them. "Please just fire me. If it means saving the others, it's better for me to take the fall alone." Joseph resented my higher salary, so it would solve his issue if I left. "Fine, then you're fired as of today. Don't come back tomorrow." Watching Joseph struggle to contain his laughter made me grit my teeth. I couldn't believe it had come to this. However, it's also true that working with Joseph any longer would be unbearable. "Thank you for everything." With those words, I greeted, gathered my belongings, and left the factory. I knew my departure would cause some trouble for the factory, but my desire not to work with Joseph outweighed everything else. I couldn't understand why President Smith made Joseph the factory manager in the first place. Even if it was a hire through connections, bringing in someone so ridiculous. Was it because he was close to retirement and didn't care about the company anymore? Of course, I knew better than anyone that President Smith wasn't that kind of person. He was compassionate and cared deeply for his employees. That's why I couldn't comprehend it. I sighed for what felt like the 100th time and trudged home. A week had passed since I quit. James and other subordinates called me daily, urging me to come back, but there was no word from President Smith or Vice President Jones. Both of them were on business trips the day I resigned. Therefore, I couldn't tell them directly about my resignation, but they must have heard it from other employees. Even so, not calling me must mean they chose Joseph over me. I've been brooding over this for the past few days. I glanced at my phone and saw a call from the company. Thinking it might be James, I answered. "Hey, get to the company right now. What's this about a $30 million loss?" I frowned at the angry voice from my phone. I had let my guard down because I hadn't heard from Joseph all week. I never thought I'd hear Joseph's voice again. "Even if you tell me to come, I've already resigned. I'm no longer an employee. The loss is because I was fired. Right, I'm an engineer, and there are parts only I can make. Isn't that the loss? Enough with the excuses. Just get to the company now, otherwise I'll be the one getting fired." Who would want to go back to the company after being yelled at like this? As I stayed silent, I heard some commotion on the other end. "John, I just heard what happened. I was told you were on sick leave. I'm sorry for the late contact." Suddenly, the caller changed to President Smith, and I felt like I had just woken up. It's true that I had been sulking over not hearing from President Smith until today. Hearing President Smith's voice after so long, I couldn't find the words. "Should I come to your house? I just need to talk to you." President Smith's voice sounded desperate, more than I'd ever heard before. He seemed genuinely anxious. "I'll head to the company right away." Before I knew it, I had answered that way. Right after the call from President Smith, I headed to the company. Entering the company after so long felt strangely nostalgic. "John, thank you for coming. I'm truly sorry about all this. I had no idea things had gotten this bad since Joseph arrived." President Smith spoke with deep regret. Hearing this, Joseph glared at me. He's the one who said he wanted to quit. It's true we argued, but John chose to resign. I was speechless at Joseph's blatant lie. He was the one who said I was fired, and that if I didn't leave, he'd fire other employees too. First of all, it's ridiculous that he gets the same salary as me. He's just an ordinary employee making lame screws, but he gets the same pay as me, the factory manager. What? President Smith looked stunned and glanced at the other employees. He had a look that seemed to say, "What is he talking about? What is he saying?" President Smith's words matched his expression. He said John's screws are lame. Who told him that? Well, I mean, look at these tiny, toy-like screws. They're useless, and it takes forever to make them with the machines, so he must be slacking off. Joseph said this while laughing, and President Smith let out a deep sigh. I never imagined it would be this bad. It's worse than we thought. Vice President Jones, standing next to him, looked equally disappointed. Joseph stared at them, utterly confused. What's the big deal? I mean, the idea that you'd fire me if you didn't bring John back is ridiculous. The company is better off without a useless freeloader like him. A useless freeloader? It's almost like you're talking about yourself, Joseph. What? President Smith's tone was gentle, but his face showed he was completely furious. I had never seen President Smith like this before. John is the genius designer who created our company's flagship product, the micro screw. He is also the only employee capable of making it. What? Aren't screws made by machines? And designing screws sounds exaggerated. Anyone can make those. Joseph laughed as he spoke. It's true that machines make the screws. However, these screws are truly special. Joseph, do you really not know about these screws, even while working at our company? No, they're just small screws, right? Any company can make those. President Smith sighed and pointed to the awards displayed in the office. Do you see those? The wall was covered with framed awards, all bearing my name. What's with these awards? These are just some of the awards John has won. That screw shook the industry back then. It was considered impossible to create such a tiny screw. There are limits to size, both large and small. However, these limits aren't the same across all fields. In this field, it was often the case that while smaller parts were possible, there were limitations on the size of components, preventing the completion of the product. With the birth of various precision machines, the industry's problem was that screws couldn't meet the required smallness. When they are too small, maintaining shape and strength becomes impossible. When I was in high school, they said it was impossible to make screws any smaller. I decided to start this company after meeting John, who was still a high school student at the time. John was top of his class at the best technical high school in the state and was designing the tiny screws considered impossible back then. It wasn't perfect yet, but he was close to completing it through repeated prototyping. I entered the technical high school because my father was a professor at an engineering university. I wanted to be involved in engineering like my father, so I entered the best technical high school in the state. The time I spent there was valuable, especially because the school had facilities that ordinary technical high schools didn't. I spent every day on design and experiments. I knew I was somewhat isolated from my school and friends, but I was the type to fully immerse myself once I got interested in something. I decided to design tiny screws because of something my father said. It's not impossible, theoretically, but there's no designer who can turn that theory into reality right now. If my father said it could be done, then it had to be possible. I was sure of that. There was a famous student at the technical high school, and it was a hot topic in the industry. Everyone wondered which company he would join or if he would go to college. I first heard that John was designing almost complete micro screws from his father. I had business at the university where his father was a professor, and he told me about it. I couldn't believe it, but after hearing the story, I thought I had to meet John. Knowing his father was an exceptional person, I thought maybe there was something special about John too. President Smith walked into my classroom unexpectedly while I was experimenting at the technical high school. Seeing the micro screws I had made, he excitedly said, "Come work with us." He asked me to join, but the company was not even set up. Looking back, it was almost like a scam. Well, if you look at the facts, maybe. But the moment I saw John, I knew I had to start a company. I was sure it would succeed. At the time, I planned to go to college, so I turned down President Smith's offer. I still had things I wanted to learn. However, President Smith came every day, saying, "It's fine if you attend college. Just come to our company and develop the screws." Eventually, I gave in. I thought no one else would ever need me as much as he did. It seemed best to work for someone like that. He even promised to upgrade the factory's equipment for me, allowing me to design, develop, and manufacture without any hindrance. We quickly patented the micro screws. They won awards in various competitions, leading to numerous contracts and spreading our reputation. The screws John developed were that impressive. Hearing President Smith speak proudly made me feel both embarrassed and genuinely happy. Joseph, who had been listening, looked stunned. He probably never realized the screws were so valuable. Those screws are so small that machines can't make them perfectly. The day's temperature and humidity require micro adjustments. Only John can do that perfectly in this company. Of course, it's not that my subordinates can't do it, but it's a rule that I make the final check. That's how difficult it is to manufacture these micro screws. Yet, you went ahead and fired John without my permission. Do you have any idea how much damage stopping screw production has caused us? No, I didn't. Please forgive me, for my brother's sake. Even now, he's using his brother as a shield. What a disgraceful person. I haven't told you this, but President Johnson sent you here to get rid of you. What? President Smith looked slightly awkward. I was also shocked, and Joseph's expression froze. Joseph originally worked at President Johnson's company, but he was causing constant problems. Even though he turned a blind eye to everything because Joseph was his brother, it got too bad. He asked us to take you in, promising to increase our big contracts if we did. What? This revelation must be hard for Joseph to hear. But it also made sense. Without such a reason, there's no way Joseph would have joined our company. Our company is so popular that we constantly receive applications from all over the country. At first, I was hesitant, but I thought it would be fine if John was at the factory. He handled all the factory manager's duties anyway, and he could deal with any issues. I never imagined he'd fire John without permission. President Smith sighed, looking exasperated. Indeed, we never had an official factory manager position. I was doing all the work. This past week, I thought you chose Joseph over me because I didn't hear from you. No way. Why would I choose someone like Joseph over you, the next president? What? Did he just say something unbelievable? I blinked and asked, what did you just say? Me, the next president. I wanted to tell you for a while, but you always avoided the conversation. Wait, but isn't Vice President Jones supposed to be the next president? Confused, I looked at Vice President Jones, who was grinning. I knew you thought that, but it's not true. What? Jones will continue to support you as Vice President. Considering your achievements, I think everyone already saw you as the next president. It's true that I admired President Smith, but this sudden announcement left me speechless. The reason this company exists is because of John. There's no one more suitable. I only became vice president because I was part of the founding team by chance. I know I'm nowhere near your level in terms of ability, John. This company is essentially John Anderson himself. That's what both President Smith and I believe. Their words slowly sank into my heart. Being acknowledged by these two men I respect so much made me incredibly happy. What about me? Amid this, Joseph timidly spoke up. Of course, you're fired. President Smith replied curtly. It was the coldest tone I had ever heard from him. Your brother, President Johnson, also said we could fire you immediately if there were any problems. After this incident, it's clear you're not needed here. Pack your things and leave immediately. Wait, please. Joseph clung to President Smith's leg, crying. It was a pathetic sight. Does he realize this is all his own doing? And we'll be billing you for the losses incurred during the week John was gone. What? $30 million. Joseph's voice cracked, and his face turned pale. I'll consult with our lawyer and get in touch. I doubt President Johnson expected such a massive loss. Wait a minute. Joseph's voice trailed off, filled with despair. Pack your things and get out within 5 minutes. President Smith's eyes looked at him as if he were an insect. Joseph hurriedly gathered his belongings and left the company in tears. After that, things went downhill for Joseph. He was sued for damages amounting to $20 million, and the trial has already begun. The final judgment is uncertain, but even if the damages are reduced, he will still have to pay a significant amount. President Johnson, upon learning of the incident, came and apologized to President Smith and me. He also declared he was cutting ties with Joseph and would never lend him money, leaving Joseph without any support. Without any savings, Joseph was kicked out of his family home and is now reportedly living like a homeless person. When Joseph appeared in court recently, he was a shadow of his former self, looking utterly exhausted. Falling from grace, Joseph likely won't return to a normal life anytime soon. As for me, I am receiving daily training from President Smith on the duties of being a president. Vice President Jones is well versed in all the president's duties. So it seems I'll be managing both manufacturing and presidential tasks alongside him. I'm worried about being a good president. I don't know if I can be as great as you, President Smith. Well, if I have one piece of advice, it's that you don't need to mimic me. What? I tilted my head at President Smith's words. This company was created for you. The time I served as president was like a chrysalis stage. Now, this company will spread its wings and fly like a butterfly. You want to expand overseas, right? Yes. It's been my dream for a long time to have our technology recognized worldwide. This company will grow even more with you as president. I'm confident about that. President Smith's words were powerful. I felt that he genuinely trusted me from the bottom of his heart. From now on, as president, I will ensure that our company's technology is recognized overseas.